Welcome to your College-Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Dave. I'm a parent of a daughter in college, and we live in Chicago, Illinois.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a graduate of the University of Georgia, and she is getting her master's degree at North Carolina State University. Morning, friends. Good morning, friends. I've got a few announcements to make. And then I can't wait to do a preview about an interview that I'm very excited about. I think you're going to love it. I've heard it twice, and I look forward to hearing it more times. But let's dive in with our announcements. The first one I want to share is for those of you who signed up for YCBK Plus. I know you may be wondering, like, okay, we got this great article from Lisa that was fantastic, but after that, it's just been crickets. What's going on? Well, I just want to let you know that we are repurposing and doing a rebrand and re-rollout of YCBK Plus. You're going to really love it. I really like the changes we're going to make, and you'll be hearing a lot more about that next Monday and next Monday's episode, so be sure to tune in for that. We think these changes are going to be really well received, and so look for that next Monday for more details. You know, there's something I don't often mention in our announcements, and that's changes that occur in admission offices. But there are a few that have occurred that I want to mention, because if you're looking at these schools, you know, the leadership always results in change in the admission office. And there a few schools have made some pretty exciting hires. So let's start with Peaches Valdez. I was scheduled to interview Peaches on July 27th, actually at Hamilton, with Julia. You know, and then Julia and Peaches are friends. So Julia reached out to me. She said, Mark, did you hear the news? I was like, no. Peaches took the position at Wellesley. So she'll be running the admission office at Wellesley College. And so I'm not going to interview Peaches at Hamilton. I told her, I said, I'll wait till you're at Wellesley for a couple of years and we'll interview you then. So that's an exciting change. One we probably should have mentioned. It's about 7 months old now. Joy St. John's, who a very talented admission officer who was at Wellesley, has moved on to Harvard. And a big one was just announced this week, Sean Abbott, who's really beloved in the field. Fantastic work. A lot of us in admissions know he did when he was at NYU. He continued to do great work at Temple. And Tulane just announced that they have hired him. And so I think Sean's going to be really fantastic for Tulane. So just keep an eye on that, because when you see these hirings, just like presidents, they're inevitably, they bring their philosophy, their vision, and you do see changes that occur in their admission practices, you know, within their offices. And usually people are hired intentionally because they're looking for something a little different from what they have. Sometimes it's a continuity thing, but more often than not, there's an awareness of maybe some weaknesses in the admission office, and so they're looking to hire somebody who has a particular skill set of strengths that match the needs that they're going for. And personally, I can see that with these hires. So what's going on with Biden and loans? Well, you know, all I can tell you, we expected a major announcement 45 days ago. That didn't occur. But for those who have had their federal loans paused, which has been happening all the way back since March of 2020, all I can say is expect another pause again, because payments were supposed to go out end of August, and they have put notification out to the loan servicers to hold off on sending notices to all of the people that have loans that they need to start with their payments again. So expect, once again, for this pause in payments to be extended a few more months while the pressure is on. You've got the liberal progressives, people like Elizabeth Warren being one, and many others as well, including Senator Warnock right here in Georgia, putting a lot of pressure on the Biden administration to go beyond the $10,000 and keep that he said he would he would forgive when he ran as a candidate, and they're pressuring him, saying that it would be a jump to the economy and it would help a lot of boroughs, particularly some underserved boroughs, if they could have a fresh start and not be so hamstrung by debt. And it would be good for them. It'd be good for the economy. And then you have the Republicans who are saying it's going to just lead to more inflation. So, and some are challenging whether or not he has the executive authority to unilaterally make that decision. And so with a campaign and an election coming up, I would be very surprised if those who are looking for more debt relief do not win out. I'm not saying they're going to get the $50,000 that Warnock and Warren are asking for, but personally, I'm expecting something more than the $10,000 that Biden had teased out before. But we'll see if I'm right on that. For those of you who are following the affirmative action case in the Supreme Court, that had an interesting announcement this week. Ketanji Brown Jackson had been told she had to recuse herself from both cases, the Harvard case and the UNC case, because of past connections. But this week, the Supreme Court took an initiative to allow her to be on and participate in discussions for the UNC case. Now, she had an active role in 2016 at Harvard, so she'll excuse herself from that case. So some people are saying, whoa, what's going on? I personally think that means nothing other than window dressing. I think if anything, they probably want her to be able to be on there so that they can go ahead and probably have a 6-3 decision ending affirmative action and say at least, all voices are at the table. So I think that's a little CYA, and I think that means nothing. If anything, to me, that's more of an indication that race-based admissions will be overturned after being the law of the land for more than 50 years. Okay, another thing that's on the rise is direct admissions. And I'm just going to touch on this now because this is something we need to do a lot more of a deeper dive into. I don't feel it would be serving you well and doing justice to this topic, but I just want to tease it out. And so this is on the rise. People are frustrated with the complexity of the admission process. So more and more and more you're seeing schools try or seeing experiments with systems where students can just put a profile together and schools can just go right in and admit them right off the profile. And I'm not talking about a profile where something is complicated with lots and lots of essays and all of this, but a simple, obviously, transcript will be involved, possibly some writing. You're seeing different systems out there. One of them involves a counselor having to, endorse and stand behind a student. There's just different models out there. So you're seeing a lot of experimentation in this area, and I expect this to be something that we'll see with a lot more frequency moving forward over the next 3 years in college admissions. So keep an eye out for various forms of direct admission. Okay, I'm excited about our interview today. As I've said, I've heard this, and it's absolutely fantastic. And it is Lisa, and she did an absolutely amazing job interviewing Christina Boyd-Smith. Now, Christina Boyd-Smith's very interesting. She is an executive coach. She's in the St. Paul, Minneapolis area. She's founded a company called Corporate Rebels, and they do exciting work. I just want to read a statement that I really like about the company. So she says, my program helps corporate rebels and rebels of all kinds to quiet negative voices, to heal the exhaustion of inauthentic life and work, to get in touch with their deep purpose, to bring vision to their life. So that's just a little bit about what she does. But more importantly for this interview, she is part of what I call our listening family. And that our listening family to me is someone who never misses an episode. And that's Christina. She's gone back, heard every single episode of You're a College-Bound Kid. And she communicates with us. In fact, I had the pleasure of spending an hour and a half with Christina when I was in Minneapolis a couple of weeks ago, which was fantastic to meet her. And I can't remember how this emerged, but I can't remember if Christina proffered this or if Lisa came up with it. But somehow the idea emerged that we really should do an interview on our podcast that focuses on, one, a boy. If you go back and look at most of the student interviews we've done, they've been young ladies. So we needed to do one on a male. But some other particular niches. One is, what about a student with ADD? We haven't talked about that. What does that look like in the college admission process? How do you shepherd that? How do you navigate that? What about a student that's content getting B's and C's and doesn't necessarily feel they need to strive for A's? How do you as a parent handle that? So Christina's got a son like that. Her son works with Lisa, and the two of them just have a fantastic conversation. And Lisa can relate as well, having had a daughter with ADD and a daughter who also was okay if she never got A's. So they just have a very enlightening and insightful conversation. I was going to give more of a detailed outline of the content of what they say actually in that conversation, but I think I'm just going to leave it alone and let them go. It's a one-parter, goes about 50 minutes. Just listen and enjoy.
Today, I'm here with a special guest, Dr. Christina Boyd-Smith, and we are going to talk about the lessons that we've learned from parenting kids who aren't typical high-achieving students through high school and the college process. I'm really excited to have Christina on the podcast. She has her PhD in communications, is a successful executive coach, and is also a fantastic mom of two college-age kids. So I know she's going to have a lot of great information and material for us, and I can't wait to hear it. Christina, can you tell our listeners just a little bit more about your background, yourself, your family?
Yeah. So hi, everybody. I'm Christina Boyd-Smith. I myself am a college graduate. I have a master's and a PhD. So I got as much college as I could handle. And, I would describe my husband and I are your typical A students, compliant, did everything right, went to good colleges, did the whole thing. And we have a daughter who is also like that. And then we have a son who's very consciously decided he's going to take a different path. So I have two children. One, my daughter just graduated from high school and she's off to college in the fall. And then my son is a junior. And so in full transparency, he's been working with Lisa. And I will certainly talk about that. There's very, very conscious choices that were made around that. And he is a junior. And so he's in the middle of his college discernment process right now.
Great. So, tell us a little bit about your son's conscious decision to take a different path, what that was, and how you guys reacted at the time.
Yeah. So actually, before I say anything else, I want to say, I talked to him about doing this podcast with you and asked for permission. I didn't even have to ask. He's like, of course you can say whatever you want. He doesn't have anything to hide. He's like, he's my real name. He's not feeling any shame. He's very proud of himself and he has reason, and he has good reasons to be.
Absolutely.
So I think I'm going to start a little farther back because I think it's for parents who have children who are not doing what we consider to be, and I'm putting this in air quotes, the typical path. We think the typical path is, A student, cares about their academics, wants to go to the best college possible, at least in the world that I live in, this is what we think of as normal or as our typical student. And I would say that Calden, so my son Calden, has really challenged my notions of what a successful journey to adulthood and through high school looks like. And it wasn't always an easy challenge. So if we go back to 7th and 8th grade, he was, not turning in homework, not completing things on tests, was appearing, according to his school, unengaged. And when you ask, how did I react at the time? Let's just say, you would expect a type A mom to react, right? Exactly. Panic mode, contacting teachers, and frankly, harassing him constantly about his work and his homework. And whenever he'd be playing a video game, I would be draped over the attic stairs being like, so honey, what do you think about studying for that test? And we were fighting a lot. It wasn't pretty. And he ultimately decided to change schools. So he was in a K-8 program. When his sister graduated, he decided to change to the same school she went to high school. And that he drove that decision. We did not drive that. And he entered into a new school. And we saw I thought, okay, great, this will fix it. He's in a new environment. Maybe it was the environment, not enough kids. It was a small school. So he transfers into this bigger school. And we saw the same types of behaviors. The difference in this case was that the teachers absolutely loved him. And they were like, okay, we don't really know what's going on here, but we were seeing the same stuff. And 8th grade was a bit of a struggle, and a struggle for him and a struggle for us. And We actually had our daughter do neuropsychological testing because of some things we were seeing in math and science for her. Something just wasn't adding up. And it was such a good process. It was so helpful. Like we just saw how her brain worked, and she ended up being diagnosed with this teeny tiny little kind of niche learning disability. And it explained everything. We were like, this is so amazing. For fun, let's have Calden tested. We just did it. We did it for fun.
Yeah, that's what we like psychology people do, is we test for fun. Just ask my kids. They'll tell you.
I know. Well, we didn't really know what we were seeing. Like in hindsight, duh. Right. And so then we do all the testing, and it comes back that he has ADHD without the H. He doesn't have hyperactivity. He only has inattention. And so when we learned from the psychologist that his brain, she said he's missed 50% of what's happened in a classroom for his entire education. His brain just shuts off and he can't control it. And he's extremely bright. And so he had filled in the blanks for years and years and years until things got complicated in middle school, and he could no longer fill in the blanks, and he was starting to kind of get crushed by it. He was overjoyed by the diagnosis. We were overjoyed by the diagnosis. It explained a lot of things. And that doesn't mean that the journey just became easy at that point, because then there was like all the medication and whether he was willing to take it and that kind of stuff. So we can talk a little bit more if you want to about that. But entering ninth grade, we at least now had an understanding that our son's brain was wired really differently. And over the course of his high school journey, I'm like, I can see like, oh, this ADD thing, it's real. Like, this isn't just like, oh gosh, my kid is a little dreamy. Like this is real, and it has real consequences for how he navigates himself in the world and how he navigates himself through school. So I'll say one more thing, and then you can ask me another question and steer the conversation, which was, I think it was in 8th grade. So this was before he was diagnosed. He says to me, because of course he's very smart, and he's particularly smart in like humanities sorts of things, and he has very good words, and he's the child of an executive coach. And so, he's learned the language, and sometimes he uses it against me.
Of course. Well, that's what all smart kids do.
I know. Like in 5th grade, he's like, gee, Mom, my intuition tells me I shouldn't go to school today.
That's fabulous.
He's also, did I mention he's hilarious? He is also hilarious. Yeah. And so he just said one night, he was like, Mom, I'm just letting you know, I'm going to be a B student. And of course, like, I'm like, oh my God, he's going to be a B student. And he says, an A is a really great grade, and a B is a fine grade. And the effort that it takes to get from a B to an A just isn't worth it to me. I have other things I want to do with my time, and I'm not putting in that effort. And there were sort of two things that happened. One is like, okay, like at this point, like I can't force him to be an A student, nor do I want his whole academic life to be motivated because I was pushing. And then the second thing was, I freaked out and called the college counseling office at the high school where he was. I called the head of the college counseling office, didn't even know him yet, and was like, you got to help me. Like, this was my real question, and I'm almost embarrassed to say this. I was like, do B students go to college? I really believed that B students don't go to college, that only your A students, your top students, they go to college. Everybody else, I don't know what, becomes, goes to technical school or like chooses a different path of some sort. And he just like laughed out loud. He's like, of course B students go to college. But I tell this story to give your listeners a sense of like where I was in my thinking and like the kind of faulty things that I believed about the college process and about what it means to be a successful adolescence and journey through adolescence. I had a lot of faulty assumptions that were just based on my own experiences as a highly accomplished, box checker, who like did all right, who like did all the right things and like, had my self-worth wrapped up in my performance. Like I had to unpack that in my 40s, but my son's self-worth is not wrapped up in his performance.
Mm-hmm. And I think you bring out such a great point, which is so many of us, we have certain expectations for our children. And a lot of times you don't even realize what those expectations are until suddenly there's a discrepancy between them. And I think, just like I'm grade grubber, high achiever, what do you mean you didn't turn in that assignment? It's unthinkable, right? Unthinkable to not do your homework. And so to have a kid who didn't value all that, like it was shocking. And I really struggled for a while with trying to figure out like, like, how can that be? How can there be this other reality? And in a way, kids have so much pressure on them these days, right? To get all the A's, to get the test scores, to have like your own nonprofit, to try to apply to all these schools, which are heavily marketed to them and also are, the subject of a lot of peer pressure. And that is not good for mental health. So I think like a choice like Calvin makes, or like my daughter made, was like, my daughter said she was going to be the 89.5 student. So
maybe they should be friends.
I think they would quite like each other. And so, but like that, in a way there's a healthiness to that choice. And I think, I think most listeners know that my daughter has ADD as well. And I think that is what we're asking them to do is such a higher mental workload. It's really, really perhaps impossible. And to say like I am really terrible at bowling, so I don't go bowling, right? I can opt out of bowling, but it's harder to opt out of school. So, and I just think that so many, and I think, when we look at our listener survey, I think a lot of our listeners are sort of in the same, educational boat as you and I, Christina. And so I don't think, I think a lot of people will identify with this, of just like, what do you do when this expectation isn't going to be met? And how do you adjust to the reality of the kid that is in front of you? And how do you work with that? Because I think most of us try to fight it at first.
Yeah, absolutely. And like go into control mode, right? If I just like make, insist on an hour of homework every night, or I monitor the online portal, or I get in touch with teachers or whatever it is, like we go into this control mode and we think that's going to fix it. And I was just going to say, I remember Calden, so his sister is, more like me, right? Like did all the things, got into the college. And he said once, he's like, well, look at how much stress she's gone through to accomplish this. He's like, I don't want to live like that. And I was kind of like, oh, that's interesting. Like, what is it like to make a choice to not live under the constant mantle of stress? Now you need some stress, right? He can't just like sail through life without having some motivation. Course. And he does. I think part of this, I think of, I did a lot of reading. I'm that mom too, right? So I did a lot of reading on boys and, education and our education system. And I've had a number of people who are experts in the world of raising teenagers and particularly boys who have talked about our education system serves a very narrow set of skills and a very narrow set of brains. And so if you're a person who can sit still, right? If you're a person who can pay attention and you want to check the boxes and it's satisfying to you to do the assignments, and to, then school, the way it's set up is set up for you. But somebody said to me once, actually a very prominent psychologist who came to speak at my children's school. And then I emailed him. I was like, oh my God, I'm pulling my hair out and I don't know what to do. And he said, school is not designed for your son and your son is not designed for school. He said, but don't worry, he's designed for work.
Right.
And, and so I really so when Calvin and I stopped fighting, when we'd gone through a period where we don't fight about things anymore. And I made a comment to him. I'm like, we don't fight anymore. And he said, well, yeah. And I said, why do you think that is? And he said, well, because I got better. And I was like, no, actually, yes, you've matured and you've gotten better, but also we aren't fighting anymore because I did a lot of work on myself and my own assumptions and on my perception of you. I did my stuff. And I fundamentally changed how I relate to you in order to preserve our relationship and free him up to have the journey he's destined to have, which does not look like the journey his sister's on and does not look like the journey that I was on.
Absolutely. And I think that, is such an important point that, people are who they are. And our job, I guess, as parents is to try to help that person with their particular set of skills and talents be as successful and happy as they can be. But so often we expect people to be who we are, or people to meet our expectations. And giving that up is hard, and it requires a lot of self-examination and work on our part. And I always I'll tell people that my eldest daughter has taught me so much. She's a brutal teacher, but she makes sure you remember it. And I am not the mom with my younger two kids that I probably would have been if she didn't come first. And, they probably owe her a huge debt of gratitude, I think. And so, but it is a change. And I notice, like, if I'm having a bad day and I'm not at my best and I kind of slip back into some kind of, type A controlling perfectionist behavior, we go right back to where we were, and the thing is, I recognize that now. I'm like, I'm just going to go shut up now and go be over there. And then it stops. But you're absolutely right. Like, success requires change on the part of the parents. Like, you can't make the kid be something they're not.
One of the amazing things about teenagers, and particularly about my teenagers, and again, like I said, I think this is true of all teens, but mine were raised by an executive coach. And so they just, they were in that milieu, children raised by psychologists. I remember it was 8th grade. We'd had his conference with his teacher, and his teacher had really hammered him on a bunch of stuff. And we came home, and I was lying in my bed, and I was like, I just want to check in like a few more things about like what we talked about with your, with your advisor, and some of these gaps and some of these things that are happening. And he just nailed me to the wall. He just was like, Mom, here's the thing. We talked about all of this with my advisor, and it is never enough for you. It's never enough. I could tell you over and over and over and over again, and it's never going to be enough. And he was right. Like, it hurt in the moment. And I was like, oh my God, like, no, you need to be compliant, whatever. But he was 100% right that, there was nothing he could say or do that was going to be satisfying. And I really took that to heart. And like you said, they can be brutal teachers. And if we're willing to listen to what they're really telling us, and we're willing, I have a phrase that I kind of use for myself that I did this coaching process for myself to help me wrap my mind around some of this. And then I also have coaches, and I work with my coaches, and my son is frequently a lesson for me with my own coaches. But one of them was, I choose to see the truth. And what I meant by that for myself was like, I actually need to see what's really happening here. Right. So things like when he plays video games, he's an amazing teacher. Like, he's always like teaching other kids how to play. He has formed a community online of people that he knows personally, but also like friends of friends. And then like there are people in his online world, like there's I don't know if it's a she or a they, but a somebody in another state who is like, has such a high degree of social anxiety, hasn't left the house for years. And like, he has a real relationship with her and like, or with them. And, like is so empathetic, like, and I can see the truth of that. Like, he is so creative. He thrives in his ceramics class. He's the one who takes the unpopular, like he will take a position. I remember him arguing on behalf of something having to do with To Kill a Mockingbird. And the whole class was like, no, that can't possibly be true. And he's like, no, look at the text. Like, this is what it says. And, he was willing to take that unpopular stand, and his teachers love him. His brain is just, he does not think like everybody else. And his brain is coming up and putting things together. He cooks, and he builds things, and like, he's an incredible worker. He got promoted to be manager. He works at a grocery store. He's been working there since he was 14. He would say I forced him to get the job. I would say he got it on his own. And he got promoted to manager at age 16 because he's so responsible. He handled a really scary medical emergency, which then sent him to be like, all right, he handled it beautifully, but he was like, I didn't know what I was doing. So then he went and got certification in emergency response in order to be ready the next time. Like, this is not a kid who's unmotivated. This is not a kid who's failing out of life.
Right. No.
It's just, he's not interested in writing papers about, books that he's forced to read.
Absolutely. And it's just not of interest to him. And when something is of interest to him, he does a great job. For my daughter, it was theater and music and dance. And she, came alive. She has great stage presence, and she just came alive in all of those productions. She worked so hard on them. She was always on time. She was always organized. She knew everything she needed to do. Very different from like some of the academic stuff that was happening. And, I think like you just have to say like, well, that's maybe where she needs to be. She also worked as a camp counselor for several years during the summer, and they loved her at that camp. And like, she was like their chief swim instructor because she was the one who could teach the kids how to swim the best. I have no idea how she does that. I could not teach a fish to swim, I don't think. But so that's, I think, another lesson is that, number one, see your kid is who they are. Number two, let them have the space to try to excel in a different way. Like, as you say, in our society, we have all these like cookie cutter ideas, and people aren't cookies, as one of my clients famously once said. You know,
well,
and
like,
so they're not all
kid.
fit.
Yeah, like trust your kid. Right? Trust your kid.
Right.
Like there now, when you and I talked before we, got online, we said like there are kids who are trying to self-destruct, right? Who are going to fail at everything and are really truly self-destructing. That is a very different kind of set of circumstances and set of questions than what we're talking about here, right? We're talking about kids who are just like, he is not going to play the game for the sake of playing the game. He's just not. Now, he understands, and some of this is with your help, and actually some of this is with your help and some of the things that his eyes have been opened to in the college process. He understands that high school is a hoop he has to jump through to get to the next step. And so he's now kind of, as he's entered into I would say halfway through his junior year, I guess it was spring break when we went out west to look at some colleges that you recommended. He can now see, I can't just ignore this. I actually have to do these things because there's something I want on the other side. Right. And so so trust your kid, and also know that they are maturing.
Right. Yeah. And, teenagers are I don't know if you found this with your kids, but I certainly see this in mine. One day they can be as mature as all get out. And then the next day you're like, what the heck happened? They make all these maturity gains, but they're not consistent with them yet. And so you're going to get a lot of ups and downs. But I do think the point that you said is motivation is everything. And when Calvin went out and he saw some schools that he thought, hey, I can really see myself here. And then he came back and I was like, well, look at this grade. They're not going to like that at that school. And so that grade, it went up very quickly and then it was done and there was no issue about it, and that is, I think the thing too is rather than trying to have your kid meet this perfectionistic kind of standard, what is the thing that you need to do to get to the next step? Try to quantify that. And then it becomes, just a thing that they do, like he would do for work or do for anything else.
Lisa D'Amour talks about this in her book on girls and anxiety, teaching, for our highly motivated, really anxious girls, we also need to teach them when to coast. When the B is good enough, right? You've earned the grade you want in that class. You can get a C on this paper and still have an A in the class. Maybe you just let that one slide so that you can, do something else. We actually need to teach those skills to some of our high achievers because they become my clients in their 50s when they're burned out by trying to be perfect at everything, right?
Yes.
And so there's again, it goes back to that, seeing the truth here. There's wisdom in how he's navigating himself.
Absolutely.
And there's balance. Like I said, he's actually not interested in failing. He's interested in getting to the next step, but he's interested in doing it with the
least amount of effort, right?
With the least amount of effort required. That's right. Mm-hmm. And he's smart enough that his least amount of effort produces pretty good work.
Right.
Right. So I'm just looking at okay, so if we were giving advice, what have we said thus far? Trust your kid, do your own work. Really, you need to learn how to manage yourself and your own feelings, challenging your own expectations, see the truth of them. And even I'll add to that one, I even started to wrap my mind around, well, what if he doesn't go to college? Mm-hmm. What if he goes to technical school and he becomes an electrician? How would I feel about that? Because we are I come from a long line of academics, right? I come from people with PhDs. This is, high school, college, Peace Corps, PhD was my, was there any other option? I was talking to a friend of mine, who also got her PhD and she's like, we grew up in a world where everybody had a PhD. So wasn't that what we were supposed to do? And I was like, I didn't realize there was another choice. Right? That's sort of crazy now. When I think about it, of course, there were lots of other choices. We just didn't realize it. And so if he went to technical school, yeah, that'd be fine. He might have talked to you about this, but he's kind of dancing around the idea of what if I go to culinary school at some point?
Oh no, yeah, we chatted about it.
Okay, and I'm okay, right? Culinary schools, people. So as somebody who works with people on a lot of career questions, people get where they're going in lots of ways. There's not for most professionals, there's not a straight path that was like, I did this and then I did this and then I went to this amazing college and then I did this and then I got this career. There were stop-offs and, trips to Europe with your best friend where you met someone and discovered something and, and then, oh my God, I'm going to be a filmmaker or whatever it is. Like,
right.
The path is curvy for most people. And so like trusting in his journey, where like whatever the next step is actually made me really marvel at like how he's doing himself. And one of my coaches said to me once, she's like, he refuses to let you meddle in his process. And I'm like, wow, there's something to be said for that. Like he is going to stick to his own process.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that, respecting that is just the best thing that you can do. So in terms of so we talked about like sort of the high school setting now, like turning a little bit more to college, as your college counselor suggested, like there are plenty of colleges that will take B students, C students, even students who aren't lower than C students, right? I mean, there are plenty.
Oh, good God.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
No. So, I mean, but that's not something that was in your world, right? I mean, your world was like all of the, A students.
Well,
right?
and I actually, so when I started listening, a friend of mine introduced me to your podcast before you were part of it. And I listened to I did what I do. I listened to every episode all the way back to the beginning. And then I digested everything, got current. This was maybe a year and a half ago when my daughter was in the process and she was on the path towards a more selective institution. And it made sense to me. And then I was like, at one point I emailed Mark and I was like, Mark, like, I've got a kid who makes a lot of sense with the things you're talking about, but what do I do with the kid who isn't that? And he wrote back immediately and he's like, oh my gosh, we need to address this right away because I do not want to give the impression on the podcast that like college is only for the A students that are off to Ivy League or, selective institutions, that there's a lot of other pathways and a lot of other space out there or other options out there. And so first of all, I'll say a few things about like the decisions we've made around the college process. So first of all, we did not hammer him with it.
Mm-hmm.
His school like introduces the idea their freshman year, sort of introduces the idea their sophomore year, gives them their college counselor halfway through their sophomore year, and then like they really start in earnest in their junior year. We weren't like college. So we did not. Like we gave him a lot of room to just figure out high school, figure out ADD, figure out how he was going to like his friends and all this sort of stuff. Cause he was in a new school. So that's one thing. And then when, so we have college counseling at their school, good college counseling. And it was a perfect fit for what my daughter needed, but it also required a tremendous amount of hands-on attention from me or from the parents. And in this case from me. And so, we tried to hire someone to help her with her college essay and she wouldn't work with them. She was willing to let them edit her stuff, but she wasn't willing to do creative work with them or to talk to them. She wanted to do all of that with me. So I was her executive assistant. I was her creative partner. I read her drafts. I did, and it was a lot of work. It was fun. I enjoyed getting to know my daughter in this way, right? But it was a lot of work. And so when we got to the end of her process, I looked at Calden and I was like, honey, like, I love you. And you and I both know we do not want to do this together.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, you're right. No, I do not want, he's very independent. He's like, I do not want you in my space. And so this brings me to another valuable resource for, and not a specific resource, but there's a generalized resource, a valuable resource for raising a child who is taking a different path and who is, in my case, extremely independent. I think that probably oftentimes comes along with, kids like this. They're carving their own path and they're very determined to do it, is to bring in other adults, right? Like bring in as many other adults as possible. So he has a boss at work who he absolutely loves. I have no idea. Like I like the guy. I think he's tremendous. They have a mentoring and great relationship. So that's an influence in his life, right? Like he has a therapist and the therapist is, like helps him negotiate social stuff and do things. And so like that therapist, I can't, like he means the world to our family, right? I have no idea the details of what they talk about, but like he means the world to our family. And then as when it came to the college process, I was like, look, I do not want to be hands-on in your process. I don't want to be fighting with you for a year. And so we outsourced it. And because I'd been listening to your podcast, we outsourced it to you. And I know that this isn't really like, a sales pitch for your college-bound kid, but I will say, like, it has been tremendous because I know my son in a certain way, and I also bring certain biases to the table. I'm a big fan of small liberal arts colleges. My husband and I are products of small liberal arts colleges. Our daughter is going to a small liberal arts college, and that's exactly what I would have driven him towards. And, I filled out all the forms. He put his 40 words on your questionnaire, but they were 40 very meaningful words, and you identified schools, and we took your advice. We went to see a school that I never had heard of. I had never thought of, bigger than anything I would have thought I would have, and we actually saw two out in the Pacific Northwest, and like, he just lit up. Like, it was more than I could have hoped for. Like, I was at that point, like when we took him out to do this visit, and also strategy, we took his best friend and his girlfriend. Bring friends.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, a number of kids have told me that they will engage much more with college visits if they have a friend there. If it's
Bring
just
friends.
their parents or their siblings, it's not so great.
Right. Because the pressure was off in the sense of like the kids had told us up front, I'm a coach. And so we had a little conversation at the airport. Like, what do you need from us? And they're like, we don't want you to bug us. And what does that look like? You can't ask us about college constantly. And we're like, okay, we're on notice of like how this is going to work. And we need some information. So occasionally we are going to ask you and we expect you to answer. And so like we get out there, and it was literally at one of the schools. So he really, really liked one. He didn't like one school. So that was clarifying. The small liberal arts college. He gave it a big thumbs down. And I was like, okay, like, all right. Like, oh, I know. But he's on his journey. And then trust your child. And then we went to a mid-sized school in a big urban environment. Loved it. We all loved it. He loved it. And then we went to a big school in a smaller, like mid-sized kind of town. I don't know if I'm allowed to say the names of the actual schools, but anyway.
You can say whatever you want.
Okay. Seattle University, he absolutely loved. He loved being in Seattle. And then we went to the University of Oregon, and we were not even out. We were walking out of the info session. We hadn't even toured the campus yet. And he leaned over to me and he's like, I love it. And I want to go here. And I was just like, and I'd never heard of the University of Oregon. It was not on my radar. I wasn't looking at schools at that size. This was because you put it on his list, and you nailed it. And he, like, everywhere we turned on that tour, he's like, they have a design school. Our tour guide hated high school, and she talked all about why she hated high school. Now, she hated high school and then used it as a motivation to like get A's.
Right.
And go to,
That was like just like the universe helping you guys out.
That was the universe helping us. But she hated high school for many of the same reasons that he doesn't appreciate high school. I wouldn't go so far as to say, he might say he hates high school, but I don't think he hates it as much as he represents. And like, that was so helpful and he was like, wait a minute, college isn't just more high school. Like, she's like, we teach 20 different languages. And he's like, what? His sister was born in Nepal. And he's like, I can take Nepali as a language in college. Like because he's been fighting against taking Spanish, the whole time. And because it's not his choice. And he's like, but I could take Japanese.
Bueno.
I can take Japanese. I can take Nepali. All of a sudden, I just saw like every step on that tour, his world expanding, his vision opening of what's possible for his future. And you and I both know, like, we came back from that spring break trip, and he had a new fire in his belly about like, all right, I got to jump through the hoop of high school and to do this so that I can have that. Mm-hmm. And, so part of it was getting to the right school early enough in the process to kind of salvage what was going to potentially happen in junior year. And I think he was able to salvage it. I haven't seen his final grades yet. And also having other adults who were able to see, and you don't know him like I know him, right? But that in this case, you're also able then you're not attached to a certain vision of him in the same way that I am as his mother. And so like, you nailed it in terms of the kind of schools that are really going to work for him. And so now as a result of like, all right, University of Oregon is the one to beat. And so now we're going to Colorado and we're going to see University of Denver and we're going to see Colorado State. And then we're going to take him to Vermont in the fall because his sister's going to school near to the University of Vermont, and he'll come out for parents weekend or Sibs weekend or whatever. And then we're going to go see University of Vermont to see some comparable schools.
Absolutely.
And my mind has been expanded. Like I'm now like, oh, wow. Like these are schools with whatever, 70, 80% admit rates.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, the grade grubbing, like competitive mom. I don't care. I saw the magic at the University of Oregon, and I saw him there. I saw his future, and I was like, this is amazing. And like, I got really excited about the possibilities. And if you had asked me a year ago, I would have been despairing, like, oh my gosh, he's never going to get into Carleton.
Yeah. Which, he would probably hate it there.
And he would hate it there. Right. He would hate it there.
It would be a waste of everyone's time and money. And I think that's the thing you bring up is like when you live in a certain social milieu, these other schools kind of are off everybody's radar. And the fact is, like, just because a school admits 70% of students doesn't mean it doesn't have a wonderful program or isn't a great fit for your kid. And there really isn't an equivalence between like the lower the admit rate, the higher the quality. No, I would say the lower admit rate, the better the marketing department, in my mind. But I think that so many parents don't know that. And that kind of brings me to another lesson is like, you got to resist the parental peer pressure.
Yes.
It's so hard, when you're around parents. And certainly I was telling Christina in my old neighborhood, I lived on LaSalle Street, and every dang kid on LaSalle Street was like I don't know how the valedictorian, the lead in the play, the chief dancer, the best athlete. And all the moms would just be like standing around bragging about how their kid did this and that. And I would just be sitting there not saying anything. And even though my kid is great, right? I mean, she's wonderful. So that is something I think, probably for a lot of reasons, we just have to stay in our own lane. We have to stop caring about what other people think and just do what's best for our kid and best for our family. And then, after these kids all go to college, you don't like run into those parents or those people in the same way. So as much influence as they could have at that moment, they have like very little for the rest of your life. And, I think that's like a huge growth. It's another huge growth opportunity for us as parents. And if you never have to question any of these assumptions, and let's say you have a kid who's like, Harvard's next best bet, you just think we did it right. And it was all by great parenting, right? And you don't realize that kid was just like born in the way to fit in those, things, or had some really profound talent that they just got lucky to have. And that's why that happened. And so I think that it's a great growth opportunity. It gives you a lot of empathy for other people and just a recognition that there are so many ways to live and so many ways to be happy. And truly, it's just, if Calvin goes to a school that he engages in and that he likes, he will get so much more out of it than if he went to Carleton and thought, I'm so sick of these people and I don't want to be here. It's just like high school,
right?
So that's what matters.
Well, and I was going to say, like, it is hard to be the parent in the room when you have a kid who seems like they're struggling or isn't, quote unquote, doing the things they're supposed to be doing or isn't getting the grades or, like he won't wear swag from his high school. You know what I mean? Like he's not rah high school, even though he goes to a really great high school. And sometimes it breaks my heart to be in a room full of kids who are like, woohoo, we're all going to the basketball game, or yay us, like Mustangs, and I love that sort of thing, but he just doesn't. As an executive coach, and I see inside the lives and careers of a lot of middle-aged people, basically, right? Like I work with some college students and some others as well. I've started working with some people who are much, much younger. Their mothers are hiring me. And the thing is, like, there's no guaranteed path to happiness. So like, I think we believe like, okay, if I just get into an Ivy League school, then I'm going to be happy for the rest of my life, right? It guarantees me a network or it guarantees me a certain set of, things. And it's not to say that like Ivy League schools don't have a lot of opportunities and they aren't really great schools. They are, and they're great fits for some people. But just because you went to an Ivy League school does not guarantee you a happy path, an easy career, satisfaction in your life, fulfillment. And so I think that's also been really helpful to me to be like, oh, because when you guys talk about like, there's, people think there's 25 possible colleges when there's really like 2,000 possible colleges. And the pathway to happiness goes through all of them.
Right. Exactly. That's beautifully put.
Yeah. Like, and so there's so many things that I think, to be a little cliche, that I just like let go of, or I would say like my son systematically disavowed me of, right? Step by step by step, starting in about 7th grade.
Right.
That actually I am now in a much more calm, open-minded, like I see so much more possibility, not just for him, but for like other students and other young people that I interact with, that I don't know, I just have a much more expansive and much more expanded view of what's possible for young people as they're launching out into the world. And I can see, like in my own dynamic with Calden, he's no longer burdened by like the kind of anvil that I was laying on him, in 7th and 8th grade, like the weight that I kept putting on his shoulder. He's not burdened by that anymore. And so then he's freer to live his life.
Right. Right.
And my job is to facilitate that, to provide the transportation, the money, the wind, the support, whatever that's going to look like in any particular moment, so that he can accomplish where he's going. And I can't possibly see that.
No. Well, that's so beautiful. I mean, you really put it in such an articulate and wonderful way. And I think I really appreciate you sharing all that with our listeners. But, you still have one more thing to do, and that's you got to get on the hot seat.
Okay. And I told you I didn't want to know the questions, so I did not.
I know.
Prepare.
That's why I put surprise in the notes.
I know. They
might be a surprise to me also.
Okay.
So as you know, every interviewee of Your College Bound Kid goes on the hot seat, where we just ask you a few random questions so that listeners can get to know you better in a different way.
Great.
So my first question is, what book have you found most influential in your life?
Ooh, a book that I found the most influential. Gosh, I read a lot. Most influential. If you ask me like the books that I liked the best. Okay, all right, I'll tell you. It was called Empire of the Soul, and it was it's a true story travel journal by a guy who went to India, and like lived in an ashram and like did all this like stuff. And I don't really remember the details of the book because I read it so long ago, but I read it like over and over and over again.
Right. It's probably one of those things. It's like a mind blown kind of thing when you read it.
Can I have a second one? Because there was a very close corollary to that was a book called Motoring with Mohammed that my father gave me. And it was another true story, travel story of a guy who had was a hippie in like the 60s or 70s and had gone around on a boat and buses or whatever, and got marooned on an island in Yemen and had to bury the journals he kept for like the 2 years that he was doing this kind of hippie train thing, because to get off this island, finally, like when the goat boat came, there wasn't room to take their stuff. And so he buried his journals. And then years later, as an adult, he went back to Yemen and hired a driver and went back to try to find that island and dig up his journals.
Oh my gosh.
That just blew my mind. Yeah. Yeah. Those are the most influential books for me. Mm-hmm.
That sounds fantastic. So if you weren't being an executive coach, what alternate fantasy career would you have?
I know exactly. He also assumes that you have the talent, right? I'd be a folk singer. I totally imagine myself.
I'm coming to all the concerts.
Yeah. It assumes I can sing, write songs, and play the guitar, which I can't do any of those things, but I totally see myself under the lights on a stage, on a little stool, playing my guitar and singing songs that make people cry.
That's really wonderful. I love that. That's a happy image for me. Now, hold on just 1 second.
Yeah.
What is one place that you'd love to go that you haven't been able to go yet?
Okay, I don't know that I'm ever going to be able to go, but because of Motoring with Mohammed. So I've traveled a lot in the world and I've lived in a lot of places. So I've had the great fortune to already go to a lot of the places I would want to go. I've always wanted to go to Yemen. And for obvious reasons, I don't know that Yemen is ever going to be on the list of places I'll be able to go in my lifetime. But that book just really made me very curious and excited about Yemen as a place. Like I said, right now, anyway, I don't know if it'll ever be possible, but.
Well, it's a wonderful thing. And I just want to thank you for coming on the podcast and sharing all this wonderful information and insight. And thank you also to Calden for being so open and letting other people learn from his brilliance. So I just, I know he's going to do great in the college process. And, in large part, that's due to all the work and the changes that you've done. So I'm just really glad to know you guys and to work with you. And I'm glad you came on. I hope, if we find something else that falls into your expertise, we'd love to have you back.
Great. Thank you. I really appreciate it. And when he makes his college decision, you can put it in the show notes at the bottom of this.
I will put it in the show notes. Thank you again.
I hope this was helpful. Yeah. Bye.
Absolutely.
Okay, friends. On Thursday's episode, Susan Tree's back. And she's back in full force. I asked her to share an admissions tip. And you're not going to want to miss that because she gave us almost 20 minutes of an in-depth great admissions tip. But then for our article, we'll be talking about the testing predators have beaten the ACT and the College Board. It's an article by Akil Bello of Forbes. In our question segment, Lisa and I will take on a question from a listener who's a student who wants to know, I need to pick my early decision school, and I need to pick it now. How do I go about picking my early decision school? We talk about that question. I expose what I consider to be the flawed logic in that question, and it leads to just a good back and forth about early decision that Lisa and I have. And we'll continue our interview with John Ambrose. He's the Dean of Undergraduate Admissions at Michigan State University, and John is talking about understanding Michigan State University. That's part 2 of 3. And remember, friends, college is a match to be made. It is not a prize to be won. And I think you heard that well articulated in the conversation between Christina and Lisa. See you on Thursday. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 14. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joy Stucker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stylianos Dimitriou. If you want to have a coaching session with Lisa or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcast. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Thursday.